in our sort of topics and themes that we have for every month. This month's theme is love. And one of my favorite sort of topics to engage with, because not only do I talk about relationships within ethical culture, but for my day job, week job, I talk about relationships with young people as part of violence prevention in Philadelphia. And one of what I say is my sort of like 200 level aspect with them, sort of when we get past, what is sort of red flags in relationships, or what is like kinds of care through love languages, is getting them to think about their own relationship to attachment. And when I say that, it's coming to an understanding of one's comfort with becoming close, and coming to one's understanding of how those feelings, or what influenced those feelings, what relationships in the past, what events. I think of attachment styles as a way to I think I was looking for something to speak about, sort of a pattern of behavior I had observed in myself. After a couple months in therapy, my therapist had said, "Oh, you should read Attached." And so I read it, and after a few, sort of very quickly, I realized this is about me, in a certain kind of way. So the book explains that there are four different, sort of main groups of ways that people approach the process of getting closer. So there's both the folks who are secure, where getting the process of getting closer is not difficult in terms of they're comfortable with it. The feeling is comfortable. It may actually still be difficult. There's still things you have to work out, conflicts, figuring out life and the ways of relating. But the feelings don't arise discomfort. Then there are people like me who are dismissive or avoidant attached. So they, at the prospect of getting closer, sort of try to create space and maintain a sense of independence. And there are folks who are anxiously attached, or sort of have a preoccupation, if you will, right? That the idea of getting closer makes them want to get even closer. They want to sort of be, sort of with the person more often. They sort of, if it seems like the person's pulling away, they want to pull towards themselves, towards them, closer together. And there are folks who may have experienced some kind of trauma, that for the idea of becoming close causes feelings of fear, sort of greater than sort of avoidance, but kind of fear. And it kind of also can be sort of one and the other. So both wanting to be with someone very intensely and also being very scared of being with someone, sort of thinking about the impact of that trauma. Now, there have been a lot of articles on attachment recently. So from The Atlantic, sort of talking about, very conscious that when people think about attachment styles, they think it might be a fixed, they're worried it's a fixed thing, right? And so some people start to use the word attachment orientation. And also Otha Dobrin, who's a leader emeritus in ethical culture, he was talking about attachment and sort of, whether we're wired for love. And it's we may be wired to attach, but whether that attachment is good or bad for us is a whole nother thing in general. And so I kind of want to come back to that. But when I talk to my young people, I sort of give them these markers of the developing of a relationship. And I say, as I mention these things, are you open to it? Would you run from it? Would you want it even more? Or would you try to run away? Or would you be scared? And so I'd start from, all right, if you were going on it, someone slid in your DMs. What do young people say for someone hitting on them over Instagram or Facebook or any social media app, right? How would you feel? And the young people, they'd be like, I'd be open to it, and I go, okay, what if they wanted to go on a date? They sort of respond whatever way. And then I kind of go up and up, if you will, up the relationship escalator. And this is just a way to tease out a very basic kind of understanding where people's, I wouldn't say lines are, but where the comfort of the idea of becoming close sort of extends. So I'd say, oh, if the person wanted to move in together, how would you feel? Some people are open to it. Some people would say run away. Very, very, very sort of the dispersion was what you'd expect. But it was also like sometimes you would get folks who would very clearly be able to name that they're very sort of worried about the prospect of attaching to someone, understanding the things that have happened to them in the past. So myself, and I think about myself, and I think about why when I get close to people, I sort of want to push them away. And I think about two particular moments with both of my caretakers at different times. I think about a time when I was in 8th grade and my mother was just berating me for something. I didn't do a thing. I wasn't doing well in French class, something. And then I just was in a corner of a bed and I just started crying. I just could not stop crying for like a few minutes. And she was confused and she was like, "What's wrong with you?" And I remember that moment because I think it was the last time I had ever looked at my mother as a source of protection or care. Because I never went back to her for those kind of feelings of security. Another time, when I was thinking of my father, and I think of a time where him and my mother had this long court battles, pays child support thing over whether he should still give child support. Long story. But I had said something, I was going to his house, and for a really long time, I really wanted to live with my father because of my relationship with my mother. And he had a spare room, and I was like, sort of the hope was that I'd be able to live in that spare room. And then one day he shows me this room, and he says, "Remember that time you said all your mother wanted was some support or some help?" And he said, he turned the room into a TV room. And he says, "This could have been your room. But I guess I betrayed him." So, and I remember that again, I was like very like, oh, very sorry, very blah, blah, blah. I was very hurt. And then I also remember shutting down. Like I remember that was probably my junior year of school, and I think I didn't talk to him for a year. And I think about these two incidents, and I say, it's like, what narrative have I told myself about what it might mean to trust in someone, what it might mean to open myself up when the two people I might have expected the most to support me rejected me or didn't offer security. And so I'll go back to Arthur Dobrin's point around the idea of the quality of our attachments, right? Our attachments are inevitable. We are social beings. We're driven to connect. But what makes those connections good or beneficial for us? I'll bring back the Kierkegaard quote, which I love to repeat over and over. You can tell whether love exists by the fruit it bears. So once a relationship comes into bloom, once it is spending time, what are the things that emerge from that relationship, from that connection? And so I think about my own poor teaching and facilitation. I think about, my intimacy questions or hints at intimacy, they're lacking. What I think would be better questions to ask in terms of surveying the quality of one's attachment, whether that to be to a partner to a friend, to a coworker, would be these. How attentive am I to the needs of others? How do we, in the context of this relationship, handle conflict? What are the projects we are collaborating on? What are their fruits? Is the space that we provide for solitude cold, warm, or non-existent? Now, attachment theory, I like it for explaining some patterns in interpersonal behavior, in the interpersonal relationships. But I also think it's important to think about the context within which those relationships happen, whether we think about the context of families or the context of communities or organizations. So for that, which I give Joan and Amanda Poppy a lot of credit for introducing me to and encouraging me to exploring, is looking at family systems theory, right? And so how do folks in a system could be anything larger than two people, so three people, or rather it could be, sort of different groups as it spans out. If you come on Monday when I talk about Adrienne Marie's Brown book, Emergent Strategy, you'll hear some terminologies that like fractal, but that's for later, for me to invite you to. But the way that stress works through that system from every person, right? So a single person, how well is the system able to handle either stress or some kind of outside event which causes some kind of pressure, and then how does that spread throughout the group and the system community? And so one of the big parts that it talks about, and I think something that is the sort of one of the defining tensions of ethical culture, that's sort of like, how do you preserve the individual and also think about the group, right? And so one of the ways that family system theory sort of encourages people to think about stress is through individuation, the protection of one's own, sort of the ability to differentiate what you're feeling and what I'm feeling, as not to enmesh, over enmesh, and sort of take on stress and sort of pass it throughout the system. But it also encourages us to think about what are the histories that have influenced the ways that we've learned to deal with that stress. So in systems or families or emotional units, right, there's sort of, you might see a certain dynamic play out. One person's late or they do something and another person reacts a certain kind of way, but instead of directly speaking to that person about it, they go to two other people, and then they are then do some kind of action, then gets back to whatever, and this dynamic plays itself out over and over. And so sort of similar to attachment theory, family systems theory is like, well, how did folks learn how to respond that way, right? And if changes is going to happen, it needs to take into consideration not just an individual, but how all the folks in that system learn how to respond differently to stress. I think about the impacts that have happened over my family that have led to some of the ways that we've learned how to deal with stress. So I think about with family systems theory, there's encouragement to look at sort of a timeline and map out sort of critical events in the histories of ancestors and sort of in folks in recent memory, like going to great to grand to parents, and seeing if there are patterns between, it's like, do folks in my family tend to die at a certain age? Do they tend to divorce at a certain age? Do they tend to have some kind of traumatic event or some kind of or big experience. In my family, many of the women have children almost 2 decades apart. Me and my sister were 2 decades apart. Me and my niece were actually born around the same time. And then my niece had a brother uh, who was 20 years younger than her as well. So there's some kind of pattern, right? And I think about the ways the men in my family, the relationship that they have with their children. And I think that it's hard to dismiss the role that the transatlantic slave trade and slavery has played a part in how they have responded to the stress of being providers or not being able to be providers in the family, or the stress from that has been passed on from the separation and breaking of families. I think about the women in my family, their relationship to anxiety, and what it means to want so badly to protect their offspring, their loved ones, yet not having the power to be able to. But then I think it's also not all negative. I I notice a very subtle but consistent need for documentation that has been passed on. My niece, for every holiday, Christmas, birthday, Thanksgiving, Halloween, takes family portraits with her mother, her brother, and her son. They get dressed up and they have a whole set, studio photographer. I also do photography, more as a sort of documenting of different life and travel, but it's something I realized that probably has been passed on. A few years ago, I was leafing through an albums of photos my father took in the place that I was born, and I felt a wave of emotion and responsibility to continue on this kind of tradition. So I want us to kind of go back into our little groups and talk about how we handle stress in the context of relationships, or we've learned to deal with stress in the context and through relationships. One of the sort of tenets or sort of phrases of ethical culture this leads through, I think, everything that we try to do, from education to social justice, to think about even to thinking about ourselves. Um, and that's I'm blanking, right? This is our motto. This is the thing that we talk about in the terms of relationship. Because the hope, the sort of, if there's a faith in ethical culture, is that relationships can be transformative. That by bringing out the best in the other, we bring out the best in ourselves. Man, that had to go all through my heart. See, I can really believe it. I really believe it because it was there. Uh, and to bring out the best in the other, right, there has to be some kind of deep relation. There has to be some kind of knowing, some kind of seeing, hearing, experimentation, conflict, right? But I also think of, you know, I use the sort of teachings, theorizing of Sobunfu Somé, who wrote this book called The Spirit of Intimacy. And whenever I talk about love or preside over a wedding, whoever trusts me to do that, I do on occasion. I use the text to talk in a way that's sort of outside of our culture, but I still think that sort of we need to hear because it provides, in a way, from the way that it approaches relationships, both support for this ecological model, right, of looking at attachment. Our romantic attachment is not the central or sort of like, uh, kind of biggest thing that we have going on. We have our relationship to community, we have our relationship to family, we have a relationship to the children who are going to be passing on. So we have all these relationships, and our romantic relationship or the partner we choose, according to the Bufu Some, is the person that helps us realize our destinies, right? So if there's two spirits, people come together, and the spirit that they form helps each person become the person that they need to be. Whatever role that um, whether it's like a person is a master farmer, or is meant to, or has the potential to be a master farmer, and the other is an educator, that they coming together, what they form is supposed to expand and push them towards the people they're supposed to become. Not become one unit, inseparable, or to the end of one's person's realization, right? How, and sort of I think of constructions maybe not too long ago, right? It was sent that like one person in the relationship, usually the man, right, had the responsibility of, or the burden of self becoming, right? Where I like this approach because it has us think about how do we preserve both of folks' individuality and their destiny, or their purpose, right, in the context of coming together. Another thing I like about it is and this might be a little uh, a heretic in the space, but the ritualistic aspects that it thinks about in terms of relationship, building a circle, and thinking intentionally what you bring into the circle, right, for whatever purpose, whether it's for sexual intimacy, whether it's for alleviating conflict, whether it's for meeting other people in other circles to heal the things going on within the marriage, right? It thinks about circles in these different ways. So like not only in the marriage, but also in these other places, right? And being intentional about what one brings into the space. I think of a former, still a leader in ethical culture, who wrote a book. Uh, you, you know what I'm talking about, Joe. Lois? Yes, Lois's book, Lois Kellerman, on marriage. And she's described treating it like a sanctuary, being being aware of what you're bringing in to feed and expand the relationship, to preserve, to like what parts of you are you bringing in, what parts of the other person are you bringing in, and are they bringing in, and how does that space look like together? So I want you to go back to that relationship that you mentioned to your partner before, and for your last share. You're like, whoa, this is deep. I didn't sign up for this discussion. If you could share what it is you bring to the space of the relationship you described the first time.